I don't know. They all offer different things. Brian's, I don't know. That was the largest.
Yes.
Excuse me, which guitar would you say you like the best?
You know,
And why?
Yeah, it's a little difficult because they each offer a different quality. If I were a classical musician, especially, I would probably like the one I played third. I think when I played
The French guitar.
yeah. That guitar really helped me out with melodies, and it's understandable why they composed this music to that guitar, because it definitely brings. I mean, things like you have a melody and you're playing lots of other notes as an accompaniment. The melody just comes out a lot more than. In this guitar, when I'm playing like this, it kind of sounds the same. If I played it the same in that guitar, the melody would just stick out a lot more. It's more singing. The sustain is especially nicer for me anyway. However, I usually play more contemporary and Spanish music. So I would definitely go absolutely with Brian's guitar because it offers. Well, it's for a lot of reasons. One of them is that it has the elevated fretboard like this one, but it's actually more than that one on Brian's guitar, which is just an easier way of reaching higher notes. Also, the tension it has, it's better for my hands because I tend to have strong hands as opposed to not a strong hand. And I like having tension that I can grasp on the string. So that also I liked, and of course volume. And yeah, actually, I would say that what I like the most about Brian's guitar as opposed to every other guitar is the tension of the strings, in both hands. Because if you probably noticed in some of the other guitars I had trouble sometimes with this.
To roll off.
Yeah, either it's a little bit close to the bridge, and also the bridge kind of ends like right next to the string, so that doesn't really give me a lot of room to do vibrato maybe like this, or to just press the string harder. And so yeah, I would definitely go with Brian's guitar. Although I like the Rode guitar because it just gives a different sound when you have two strings sounding at the same time with the same note. Yes.
What guitar do you personally own?
Actually, mine was built by a local luthier as well, Jeremy Cooper.
Okay.
And it's double top as well, cedar on top of spruce, which is really good for my repertoire. And it's actually really similar to this Brian guitar because it's got a elevated fretboard and it's a little bit wider and a little bit longer. Yes.
When you ordered your guitar, did you have those conversations with them and exchange, this is what I wanted to do? Or,
absolutely, yes.
Or just say, do whatever, I'll trust you?
You know, I asked Jeremy in specific for those details of the guitar that I needed it to be able to, because if you look at, this is more or less a normal guitar. If I do this, you can see how much my fingers are sticking out. So I kind of needed a little bit more of space to really be able to hit all the strings. And one of the guitars, I don't remember which one, every time I do a bar, the top string would just land in a place in my finger that wouldn't work. And it both hurt and it didn't sound right. So I had that done, and also I had it made a little bit longer, because especially when you get up here, my hand is a little bit too big to just play four notes in a row. To play that, I kind of have to crunch my fingers on top of each other, and that's not very comfortable. So that and all the wood choices and volume, all those kinds of choices were actually made by Tom Patterson, who's my professor. And I thought he knew me better than I did, and I just kind of let him decide that. And it was the perfect choice. I really like it.
One of Jeremy's guitars is in the show, just inside this room. It's distinctive because it has a sound hole off to the side. And that particular guitar belongs to Gabriel Ayala, who will be playing a concert here. Jeremy hurt his hands right before this exhibition, so he didn't have a new guitar. So Gabriel was kind enough to lend this guitar so that we could have one of Jeremy's in the exhibition. You mentioned the wood thing, and I wanted to ask Brian a question. When I was in Brian's studio, there were these big wedges of cedar, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
And you told a great story about that. Would you tell me those wedges
sure.
come from?
I had heard a guitar that's owned by a friend of mine, Dr. David Francis, that was built by Bob Ruck, a very, very well-known Pacific Northwest builder. Very prolific. This guy's built probably 1,000 guitars by now. And I particularly liked the voice of the top. It was a cedar top. And David, Dr. Francis, told me, well, you know, I think he's got a lot of that wood. Let me be an intermediary here, and maybe I can score you some wood. So he told Bob that I wanted to talk with him about the wood. So I got into this conversation with Bob, and he told me the story of this log. Western red cedar. It was a tree that was growing in the Bull Run watershed in the Pacific Northwest, and it was a blowdown. Came down in a storm. But very remote. This was an area that was never going to be logged. But the tree had enough value that they went in with a helicopter and snaked it out of there and brought it to an auction. So Bob did a little core drilling and extracted enough wood that he could do some testing. And they were allowing the prospective buyers to do this. And this wood, it's cedar, but it was testing more like spruce in the stiffness to weight ratio and the velocity of sound that it was carrying. And he thought, it was kind of a mutant tree. And he took a chance and he bought it. And he got enough wood for a number of builders' lifetimes, right? That was a big tree. So I was able to purchase from him enough wood for 50 or 60 tops. And I started using it in my double tops, and I just love the voice. You know, I've done solid tops, I've done double tops with it. I just love the voice of this wood. It's kind of cedary and it's kind of sprucey. And so it's a bit of a people pleaser there. And so I started running low on the wood, and I called up Bob and I said, Bob, I'd like to get some more of that wood from you if I may. And he said, well, actually I'm not selling any more of it. He said, I'm using it in my double tops. And I'd gotten back to him that these double tops were sounding pretty good with that wood, and that's what he's using now with his double tops. But he turned me on to a guy in Nashville who had bought a bunch of these billets, and you saw some of those. So I was able to get through a third party at a much higher price. Some of the same tree, but it was at this point, you know, it's a known quantity. It's not like a pig in a poke. I've built all these guitars out of it. I want that wood. And so it was worth it to... there's another great thing about consecutive tops sliced out of the same billet. And that is, if I make a change and I have a great deal of rosewood that came from the same tree. Now I have a great deal of cedar that came from the same tree. If I use consecutive sets and I make a change, I have a little bit better idea what the differences are that I'm hearing, what to attribute them to. In other words, if the wood is the same, then whatever I did made the difference. And that's a very, very valuable thing to have. And it's very difficult to come by, for instance, European spruce in consecutive order, because it just is. That's not the way they've laid it up, and none of the wood supply houses seem to have consecutive sets of wood from the same tree of European spruce.
By the wall.
Yeah. And it's hard to get a log over here. So anyway, that's that. So it's kind of become known as the rock log. That wood. Let's see. You had your hand up, and then you. Yes.
I would imagine, is it tough finding that right wood? Do you go touch it, feel it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, you're trying different woods, and years ago when I was apprenticing, we'd drive down to New York and go into one of the supply houses and just start picking up wood. I remember my teacher, Bill Cumpiano, came out of the Gurion guitar factory, and there was another apprentice and myself, and 3 of us went up to the Gurion factory, and we just went through stacks and stacks of wood. He had just scored a whole bunch of really cool wood, and he said, there it is, that's your school, go listen. And you pick up a piece of wood and hold it in a nodal point, which on a string would be a null, a place where there's a null spot. So the same holds true. You would have a fifth. And tapping the wood and listening to the tones, and then holding it in the middle, tapping the wood, holding it on the end, and trying to get what are the colors that this wood can offer me as a builder. So it's always a little bit of a pig in a poke, and you may get that one very, very wonderful special top, and right next to it was something from a different tree, and it's going to give you an entirely different result. So learning how to do that, how to just listen to your fingers brushing on the wood, listen to your fingernail tapping the wood, listen to the pad of your finger tapping the wood. What am I getting? How am I going to treat this wood? Flexing it. How am I going to brace this wood? How dense is it? Is this the right piece of wood for this player? This may be totally the wrong piece for this player. It might be the wrong whole species. So repetition, 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 just doing it a lot. Ma'am, yes?
How long does it take you to craft a guitar?
If I'm moderately assiduous, I'm putting out about a guitar a month. And that's a fairly leisurely rate for a guy such as myself. At my age, I'm not trying to burn the midnight oil quite so much. About a month. Yes.
Can you guys talk about how the age of the wood might affect sound?
Oh yeah. It's easy to get wood that's been kiln dried. Wood structure, the way the wood is harvested and treated, the season when it was cut, all these things make a difference in the end product. Kiln drying produces tons of wood that's usable right away. But in the kiln drying process, you often vaporize some of the resins that you would really rather like to leave in the wood, because some of those resins, as they harden, become crystallized and lend their own sound to the wood, particularly across the grain. It's very easy to get sound energy going with the grain. Spruce, cedar, the darker grain lines are like, like iron bars. And in between is kind of like marshmallow fluff. Okay, so you've got these iron bars that constitute these highways of energy longitudinally along the grain, whereas going across the grain is not so efficient. That's why different styles of bracing, ladder bracing, for instance, going across, gives you that wonderful treble, a fairly unidimensional treble, but plenty of it. Whereas the fan bracing that's gone from the ladder bracing and now you're approaching parallel to the grain. Darker tones, more complexity of tone, because you're getting different speeds of sound going longitudinally and across. You find that as ladder bracing becomes more splayed, you're getting more cross-grain discipline, a little more treble, a little stiffer feel. These are everything's a degree. You dial one a little bit more, and you dial another one a little less. We haven't even talked yet about that Santos Hernandez guitar. The Spanish school became very, very good with graduating tops. So that top is much thicker in the middle than out on the edge. And the Spanish actually developed a rather abrupt shift as you moved away from the center where the bridge is, going out. The thickness of the top fairly quickly thins and then continues to taper out to the edge. And that was giving them more limberness in the top while staying stiff in the middle where all of that torque was. You were getting a faster note. You were getting perhaps a louder treble response immediately with the attack. But you're giving up something else. There's always you have a budget of energy in that string, the plucked string. You have a budget to work with. How am I going to apportion it to attack versus sustain, treble versus mid-range versus bass? And this is what we're working with all the time. We have an energy budget. How do we make it conform to what the client would like in this particular instance? Bob?
My wife ordered some whiskey the other afternoon. They came in and specifically ordered the redwood. Is that suitable for a top for either classical or string?
Redwood? Yeah, redwood is very, very similar to cedar, perhaps a little bit softer. One would often leave it perhaps just a shade thicker. I've done some redwood with very pleasing results, beyond what I thought I would get. For particularly one client who just really liked the look of the redwood, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll do it, but is it going to sound, like I would hope? And it actually did. It sounded quite good. And I can talk with you about some of the specifics of our redwood.
One more question.
So once the wood has been made into the guitar, how does the aging process affect the sound? Since some of these guitars are obviously hundreds of years old versus your guitar that was just played for the first time, how does that change over time?
It depends on the wood to some degree. We just talk about top woods for the cedar tends to give you everything it's going to give you from the beginning. And there's even some thought it might go the other way with age.
That's fine.
Yeah, spruce on the other hand tends to continue to open up, continue to mature. And
Particularly European,
particularly European, German,
Carpathian.
spruce. So, you know, we have these guitars that are 250 years old, and